Welcome to the Red Dad Podcast, where we'll be exploring the trials and triumphs of being a father, men's mental health, and any other topic that inspires us to be rad. Through a series of interviews, your host, Jace Kelly, will be discussing and discovering the best ways to become a rad dad. Now your host, Jace.
Welcome to the Rad Dad Podcast. This is episode 13. I have my good friend Nacho. We've known each other 7 or 8 years.
Yeah.
Worked together, and then I kind of went my separate way with my career. He's still where we work together at Landmark High School. We'll get into what Landmark is and what you do there. But just to start off, tell me about where you grew up and kind of your upbringing.
So I grew up in Tucson, Arizona, and in Corpus Christi, Texas. So my dad was kind of a traveling around journalist. So when I was really young, we were in DC, and he got an opportunity to go to Tucson. So like my mom always says, like we literally had nothing, and everything we had we packed up in a car, one of those big old Ford LTDs, and drove to Tucson. And we get there because my dad's got a journalist job, and like we get there to Tucson, and like 2 weeks later or whatever, they cut his position. So now we're in Tucson with, he's got no job, nothing. And then he decided to go back to school and graduated from the U of A with a master's degree and then his PhD. And then that kind of took us to Texas. Corpus Christi, Texas, which my family is from Texas. So my dad was in they're from Mexico, but then eventually moved to Texas, and then spent 2 years there before I moved to Utah. And I still consider Texas home. Like there's just something about Texas. If you've never lived there, you won't get it. But if you have, you're like, yeah.
That's what I've heard.
Yeah.
What age were you like during all those moves?
So
and when he was going back to school and stuff.
When I was I think it was like in kindergarten when we moved to Arizona, and then we left the end of my freshman year, moved to Texas. We were only in Texas for 2 years because left at the end of my junior year, came to Provo senior year.
Oh, so you were still pretty young. I thought you moved here like in your adult years.
No.
Okay.
So
that's a huge change.
It was a huge culture shock. Like, going from Arizona to Texas wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
And like we grew up in Mexican communities,
Yeah.
My high school in Texas was like 95% Mexican,
Mm-hmm.
and then go from there to go to Provo High. You know what I mean? That was like, holy crap. That was big culture shock.
Yeah. So do you remember like observing your dad, go back to school and kind of make these sacrifices for your family, or did you even take notice?
No, I took notice. So that's the one thing about my dad is that, that's something that like I try to apply now that I'm a dad, was he was just never going to give up. My dad was going to get it done, and one of the things about my dad is he's consistent, he just will get it done. So I remember, he would work all day at the university and go to school, come home, still be active in our lives. And then both him and my mom would go and they would work basically like a graveyard shift. And so my older brother and sister would kind of take care of me and my younger sister. And then he would get there in time to, see us off to school. So I never saw my dad really stop. I don't remember a time him being lazy, him saying, I can't do this, or I don't want to do this. He was always there. In fact, I don't have one memory of a sporting event, of anything in my life where my dad wasn't there, Oh. And so that was honestly, like, that's why I still to this day admire him so much.
Yeah.
Because that was always, and I saw his sacrifices. I saw him working a ton and going to school. And one of the things that I always grew up knowing was we were poor, but I knew we were going to get out of that,
Interesting.
Yeah. Because you know what, though? Like, growing up, you have, like, my friends, I mean, again, I grew up poor. I grew up in not the greatest parts of town sometimes, but I knew we were going to get out of that because I saw all the effort my dad put in, right? Not all my friends had that. In fact,
Yeah.
I would say the majority of them didn't have that. So, I was kind of that as kind of a blessing. So
Yeah, I feel like I don't know from firsthand experience, but I know there are studies out there when people grow up in poverty, they have a trapped mindset. Yeah. So for you to say you always knew that you would get out of it, that's very interesting. Do you feel like you recognized in more depth the sacrifices your parents made after you became a father?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like there's stages in life. Your teenage years, you don't necessarily understand your parents or appreciate them. Early 20s, kind of a little bit. Mid 20s, I think, is when you start to really see everything that they did.
Yeah.
I didn't become a father till I was 31. So, start off a little bit later. But for me, that was great because it gave me a lot of time to really appreciate my parents and recognize everything that they did for me and it still do for me. I'm 44 years old. I mean, I can call my parents up. I can call my dad at any time and he's there,
Yeah. So your parents are in Utah now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So going back to your timeline, you moved to Utah, your senior year.
Yeah.
Then what?
You know what? That was hard in general. And then
That's a hard time to move.
Yeah.
Man. Like,
well, and this is pre like social media.
Yeah.
It was like long distance phone calls back then.
Yeah.
you know. So it was kind of like, all right, well, what do I do now? And originally my thought was, I want to get out of Utah and that type of thing. But it didn't work out that way. I ended up kind of bouncing around colleges. I started at, it was UVSC at the time.
Yeah, I remember that.
And then I went to Snow College. And then I went to the U. And I thought, okay, I'll finish out at the U. And then, that didn't happen. I ended up in Ogden. Graduated from Weber State. Lived up in Ogden for a little while. And was kind of, honestly, I was kind of lost at that point in just what I was going to do at that time. And I got into coaching. I loved basketball. So started helping out there at the Weber State men's program. And then I got contacted by, I'll be honest, I don't even know how I got contacted by Granger High School saying, hey, we're looking for assistant coach. So I went down there and I was young. I didn't have any responsibilities. So I drove down every day, and loved that. And I was spending all my time at a school because I never wanted to be a teacher. So that was the last thing on my mind.
I was going to ask you that. So what would you study in college?
I studied PE. Well, actually, I was a Spanish lit minor in PE. So I started out working for Clearfield City Recreation Program. And I thought, I'll work in that area, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Really, my goal was to coach collegiately. And but teaching was like, no, absolutely not. But I was spending so much time at the school that they offered me a job as like a classroom technician. So I said, why not? I don't care. So I left Clearfield City, and because I loved coaching, and I did that, and that ended really, and it was like, well, now what do I do? Because I spent the last couple of years in a school, and they offered me a job teaching, and I was like, I don't have a license. It's like, don't worry about it. Apparently that's how good our education system is, and so I took it, and then just stayed on and loved it.
So how old were you when you got the offer to teach?
Oh man, I was 25, I think, something like that, 26 maybe. So, yeah.
And making that decision, were you like, whatever, or did it take some thought? Like,
it was like, yeah, whatever, man. Yeah. Honestly, because I didn't have any responsibility,
right.
So I was just like, it's just another step while I figure out what I'm gonna do. Because again, my I always thought I'm gonna go the coaching route, and so I was like, well, get me involved in high school sports still, it'll get me a foot in the door type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, why not? Again, I had no responsibilities. I have no kids, nothing.
Yeah. So looking back on that decision, how do you feel?
Oh, it's the best decision of my life.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't come to realize that till later, So one of the things about being an educator is that it's extremely rewarding, or I should say it can be extremely rewarding.
Yeah.
You don't recognize that necessarily at first, and I didn't, because it was just a job. But as I started to really dive into what the profession was, and then I started realizing, look, I have an impact on some of these kids.
Right. Yeah.
And that was a big thing for me. And then, to be quite honest with you, so as I got older a little bit, I got an opportunity. A connection I had said, hey, I've got an opportunity for you to coach at a small college. And I turned it down. And honestly, that was like one of those big decisions in your life. And I realized, as much as that had always been my goal, by that time I had a family. And being an educator worked perfect for that.
Yeah.
I could still spend time with my kids. I could still come home. I could still do all of those things and still be fulfilled, So.
Yeah, coaching is so demanding. Like I don't know that the general public really realizes it. I mean, I grew up, my dad was a coach, right? So I know, but man, it's demanding and a lot of times underpaid.
Oh yeah.
So, but I feel like people that work in education, I'll just say, to give it a general term, educators, I feel like you can compare it like parents. Like there's really lazy parents, and then there's parents that take it very seriously and have a huge impact, right? Regardless of pay and politics and all this other stuff, right? These educators that really love their job and take it seriously have such a huge impact on kids at such a vital time in their lives. So I was able to observe that, your talents and the impact you're able to have with kids. Was there a time or an experience that you realized, like, I'm actually pretty good at this?
I mean, honestly, I think the time where I bought in the most, and this is, I don't know, maybe not everybody's experience, was when I had the most difficult time. All right. So I've been fortunate enough to work at some, I don't know, tougher schools or whatnot. So I started out at Granger High School in West Valley. From there, I went to Granite Peaks, which is the alternative school. And then I did 2 years at elementary, which was ridiculously tough. I hated it. I hated every minute. But I also got to work at some really tough elementary schools, which you don't think. And then I came to Landmark. The first time I got told to F off or had a kid get in my face, and it went really well, right? I think a lot of people, so kind of like you said, there are good teachers. I personally, I think there are good teachers. I think there are mediocre teachers, right? And I think there's some even below that it is literally a job, right? And it's a job where, unfortunately, you can be as lazy as you want to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I realized at that point that, hey, you know what? I can work with this population of kids. That doesn't bother me. And I can see that the majority of the times that they're acting out, they're in need of something. And I could provide, if nothing else, just somebody they could tell F off to, and they weren't going to get in trouble. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, and as dumb as that sounds, that's the reality. And so I started realizing that I could build relationships with these kids better than some. And so that's when the passion really took off. So, because, as an educator, you have to have passion. You really do. If not, unfortunately, that's what you get. You get these crappy teachers. And I work with crappy teachers. I work with amazing teachers, but I also work with crappy teachers, and realistically it sucks. And it sucks for those kids that have those teachers and those classes. and they're in a class where somebody is really just trying to force feed them some type of curriculum, and usually their lessons are ill prepared. And then on top of that, there's no relationship there.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So talk to me about, I guess, explain what an alternative high school is.
So I guess the best way to explain it is just we accept students that the traditional high school, that mold didn't fit for them, right? So we have all kinds of students at Landmark, when I was at Granite Peaks, that type of thing. So a lot of times the alternative is they're the bad kids, they're the kids that are really we're just waiting to drop out type of thing. But more than anything now, really, it's just a kid that doesn't fit in, and also it's a lot of times it's the kid that gets lost.
Yeah.
So I would say, like, at Landmark right now, I mean, yeah, we have a group of kids that struggled in terms of behavior. Sure, every school has that, We have another group of kids that just simply didn't fit in. They were, in some ways, they were kind of the outcasts of the traditional big high schools. And then we have other kids that it's kind of mental health reasons,
Yeah.
and they need that smaller environment, that they need that more personal connection with faculty and staff. And that's what we have. And honestly, I think a lot of the times, alternative schools aren't recognized as even a high school. If you talk to the superintendent at, he'll tell you, oh, the high schools are, Salem, Springville, Spanish, Maple Mountain, and Payson. Well, you also have Landmark, and we take kids from all of those schools, and we help all the kids that couldn't graduate at those schools. We help them graduate, and we help them just get peace of mind and feel comfortable in a place. So that's really what the alternative school is. It's not oh, you got to be worried. Oh, these are the bad kids, that type of thing. So
yeah, and in my short 2 years there, what I observed was the triumphs are bigger with those kids. The graduation's more meaningful.
Yeah.
The lessons they learn, you're able to make a bigger impact and put them on the right trajectory. Or so you hope, right? So what's a lesson you learned at Landmark that you may not have learned working at a traditional school?
Honestly, there's a million lessons that I've learned at Landmark, even compared to like Granger High School. So one of the lessons I learned, and I kind of knew this, but I didn't fully understand it. So I had a good upbringing. I had good parents. We were poor at times, but again, I knew I was coming out of this. I realized how blessed I am. So part of the struggle of some of these kids is, and I've talked to them before and things. I'm like, not everybody hits the lottery when it comes to parents or it comes to family, And so it's been a really good experience and a humbling experience for me to recognize that, I'm blessed in life, and me as an educator now have to recognize that some of the things that these kids are going through, I'll never experience. And so I have to learn to be understanding, or if not accepting of that, I always had, you had probably had the same experience where, your parent was always involved in some way in your education.
Yeah.
We have kids who haven't seen their parents in quite some time.
Yeah.
We have parents or students that are essentially, they are homeless. It's not essential. They're homeless, and they're still showing up every day. So for me, one of the lessons I learned because of that was like, one, I've got to be better in terms of understanding. I've got to be better in recognizing that I don't know what this person is going through. And it's not even my job to judge what they're going through. It's just my job to help them continue on the path, And that's hard sometimes, because sometimes you get a kid that their life lessons have taught them to be a certain way, whether it's mistrusting or even disrespectful or whatever, right? But the fact is that I don't know what they've gone through. And so I need to be like, well, hey, I mean, honestly, Jace, at this point, I've been told to fuck off so many times.
Yeah.
I don't even recognize it, anymore.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a hard thing for other people outside to see sometimes, because they're like, hey, why don't you suspend this kid? For what? That's not what that kid needs
So
right
they
now.
disappear.
Yeah. So we lose them. Exactly.
Yeah.
So
I was really excited to have you on because I wanted to get your thoughts and your perspective on the role that a father or a mother plays on a student, or the absence thereof. Like, what impact have you seen being an educator where there's an absence of parents?
So I'll speak to this. In general, an absence of parents is almost detrimental to a kid. But speaking specifically of fathers, that's even harder. Again, I deal with a lot of kids, everything, but especially for the male population, it's that not having that role model, not having that consistency. It's dramatic, the impact it has, because you see these kids and what they're really trying to do is they're trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they don't have anybody to model or to follow. Yeah. And I would say that the majority of the kids that struggle, in my experience, there is that lack of parental support. But if you look even further, or it's that lack of a father figure, and not to glorify dads, but I mean, I had a pretty damn good dad, so I know all the benefits that I got, even just simple things that you don't necessarily recognize that you're learning from your father at the time, and that can be anything from, financial advice to relationship advice, to just everything, I was actually thinking about my dad and how some of the toughest lessons that I went through in high school or whatnot, my dad was there, and the experience wasn't necessarily great, but it taught me so much, right? And so like I remember growing up, played basketball. I was a pretty good little player for my physical abilities, right? Yeah. All 5'8" of me. But I remember freshman year, we had a star basketball player, Sunnyside High School, Jermaine Johnson, right? And he went on to play college ball, successful basketball player. And I wanted to be him, I wanted to. And I remember my dad basically telling me, you're never going to be Jermaine Johnson. It's never going to happen. You're never going to be 6'3". You're never going to be able to do all these things. And at that moment, man, that hurt. It hurt a lot. And it was almost like my dad was telling me, you can't do it. But really what he was telling me is, you need to be your own person, Yeah, it's great to say, I want to be successful. I want to work hard like this person, but you're nobody else. Like, you're Ignacio Garcia. That's you. You can't be Jermaine Johnson. You can't be anybody else. And to this day, that's how I live my life. Is I'm me. For good and bad and everything. I try to be me. So, yeah.
Yeah, and working with these students, they're still figuring out who they are, right? Sometimes I still feel like I am. I mean, we're always developing, but they're just still building their core identity. So it's such an important time, and I wanted to pick your brain about your observations in the last decade with the changes or shifts in mental health in students.
Well, man, we deal with mental health concerns every single day, and Jason, I'm not an expert. I don't know why things have changed as much as they have, but I think the reality is that that's an everyday concern for us now. And it can be everything from, suicidal ideations to simple depression and anxiety. We deal with anxiety every day. We have kids that will have panic attacks or can't go to class and that type of thing every single day now. And we've had to adjust, and especially as an alternative school, we've had to adjust and say, okay, so this is an issue that our students are facing, right? Rather than fight against it, we have to make adjustments for it.
Yeah.
And whether that's provide a space for them, whether we have, we have a social worker, we have counselors, that type of thing. The mental health aspect, honestly, is changed dramatically. I grew up, and probably you too, where you didn't talk about that,
Yeah.
You didn't talk about it.
I didn't even know about it, honestly, in high school.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't know what depression or anxiety was.
Yeah. And I didn't, and if you honestly, for my generation, it was, if you did have that, it was just suck it up.
Yeah.
Don't show anybody. Don't talk to anybody about it. You just figure it out and push through, But so I struggle with anxiety bad, actually. Never struggled it a day in my life through junior high, high school. I had a panic attack my first time. I was 21. I had no idea what was happening. Thought I was having a heart attack. I was just laying in bed. I'd come home from school. I was living in my parents' basement, and all of a sudden I'm like, I can't breathe. What's going on? And then I'm just like hyperventilating and just whatever, and call my dad, and comes down, and I end up going to the ER because I have no idea what this is.
Interesting.
And they hook me up and everything. You're fine. You probably had some anxiety panic attack. And at that point, I was like, I had no idea what that even meant.
Yeah.
And then I went a couple of years and nothing. And then mid-20s, I started having anxiety and panic attacks all the time. And I couldn't control it. I was just got on medication, started going to therapy things, and it got to a point where it was consuming so much of my life. And I've managed to work through the majority of that, right? But as anybody that deals with certain mental health issues, like, you always have a little quirks or things that you're going to do, right? So for example, I have medication for if I'm going to have a panic attack, right? Haven't used it in years because I that's part of my generation. Be like, you got to push through it, right?
Yeah.
But it's also one of those things where I got to have it with me.
Be ready.
Yeah. In fact, getting here, I was like, oh crap, do I have it? It's here in my pocket. I have to have it with me all the time, So that's just one of those things there. So for me personally, that's been beneficial now. And now you can be more open about it. But when I first started having those and really where they were consuming me, again, you didn't want to talk about that.
Yeah.
So
interesting. So dealing with that and seeing other students, struggle with all their mental health issues and stuff, has it been hard for you to not bring work home?
Yeah, it definitely has. And that's one of those things where, because you put so much passion into it and whatnot, that it is difficult to not bring it home, and when I'm dealing with a kid that's having anxiety or anything like that, or a panic attack, or even is really depressed, it's hard not to bring that home and for it to be a trigger for me, Yeah. And so I don't know that I do a great job of it, but I try to separate the two. And there are definitely, you can ask my family, there are definitely days where I bring that home,
Yeah.
Because again, and I don't want to talk crap, but you have good teachers, you have mediocre, and you have whatever, right? And I'm not saying I'm anything, but I do have a passion for it. And so it does affect you. You do bring it home. You do bring those concerns home. You think about those students. You think about, hey, like, what are they doing today? Do they have a safe place? Do they have a warm place? Do they have food? On the weekends, where are they staying? So, and that's one of those things that you probably don't worry about so much if you're not a teacher in an alternative school. But if you're a good teacher in an alternative school, you think about those things.
Yeah, it's interesting because your job and there's a lot of different jobs like this, but you actually have an impact. Like you wake up and you get to go to work and you hopefully you're able to recognize that you're actually making a difference, right? With my career path, it's not like I'm making a difference in anyone's life really, you know, but with you, you have something special. And so like you said, you put passion into it, you put all this work into it. I can imagine like there's got to be some sleepless nights, you know, so.
Yeah, there definitely is. So, but again, like, here's the thing. I'm also just a teacher. I ain't I'm not nothing special.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I think we like to, hell, I don't know that I'm a benefit to anybody, right? But I like to be able to say, you know what, I was at least there,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, that's true.
So.
That's true. So talk to me about your family, your kids, and where they line up.
Okay, so I've got two older step boys, and they're 23 and 20. So Isaac's the oldest, and I'm a granddad now. He's got two babies, and oh man, that's tough. It's tough, and it's awesome at the same time. You know, I don't know how much of a role I played in you know their how they are now as adults. You know, I don't want to whatever, but it's great to see him as a dad. You know, he's a good dad. Like, his kids are his priority.
Yeah.
And I think as anybody that's a father, and you see that in somebody else, that's amazing, you know? And so he's awesome. He's, you know, he works for his kids. He does everything for his kids. And that's awesome to see. Diego, he's 20. He's kind of trying to figure out life right now.
Yeah.
But he's a hard worker. And again, that's one of those things too that I don't take any, like, you know, credit for that. But it's nowadays to see a kid that's a hard worker, you know, that's something special. You got a lot of entitlement, a lot of laziness, and that's not him. So after that, I got my daughter, Natalia. She's 13, and she is, I mean, as a dad, you're my only daughter, you know, she walks all over me. She, you know, I mean, she is, but she's amazing and great, you know, and she tries me, and she's one where it's like, oh man, I've had to learn so much because, you know, like I thought, oh, with the older boys, I learned a ton from them because I was thrown in. I had no idea, no experience as a parent, right? Isaac was 7 and Diego was 4. And so I had no idea. But you think you know a little bit, and then your daughter turns 12 or 13. And then it's, I've learned so much so quickly about how to handle, or how I try to handle situations and things like that. And, but it's, and here's the other thing. I'm glad I only have one daughter because I couldn't do two. So all the girl dads out there, more power to you. Cause hey, I couldn't do it. So then I've got my son, Ezra, and he's 10, and man, he is me. And that's, you know, you want to see like the best parts of you in your kids. And I see that. And I also see the parts where I'm like, ah, crap, you know, but he is, he's cocky. He's outgoing. He's so many things. He's funny. He's quick-witted. And he's all of these things, and he's super hard-headed, and he gets angry, and I'm like, that's me, you know, and that type of thing. But he's also the sweetest kid, you know, and so that's kind of where the kids lie. So it's cool because I've got kind of a huge range, you know, early adulthood, but with children to, you know, still in elementary school. So I was blessed with that. I still am blessed with that. But it's yeah, there's days where it's like, trying to put out this fire or even try to just help out here and then trying to understand this. And
Yeah.
so,
My parents have mentioned to me that sometimes I feel like having adult children is harder, and you have both still.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you have to put on different hats when you have conversations with your kids, right? So how old were you when you got married?
I was 30 when I lied. I was 29. I was like a month away from being 30 when we got married. And you know what? I don't know. So obviously, I grew up for the most part outside Utah. I consider myself growing up outside Utah. So most of the people that I knew got married later on. You know, so 28, 29 type
Yeah,
of
that's
thing.
very normal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I came here, it was not uncommon to be married at 21. You know, for me, waiting was good for me. It helped me figure out kind of a lot of who I was and that type of thing. So, but it's also one of those things where I don't know. I mean, I don't want to be the old dad, and I don't feel like, and I don't think I am, but
Yeah.
I'm like, when my son is going into college, I'm going to be in my 50s, so yeah.
It's funny you mention that because I always tell people, especially like kids like 21, 22, 23, I'm like, don't get caught up in other people's timelines. You have your own timeline. And they have all this social pressure here in Utah, especially to go to college, get married, have kids by certain ages. It's like, dude, you have your own timeline. I was married for 8 years before we had a kid.
Yeah.
And that's unheard of in Utah.
Oh, yeah.
But I definitely believe in sticking to your timeline and not getting caught up in somebody else's. So you're 29 years old and you get married and you walk into fatherhood.
Yeah. And it hit me like a freaking ton of bricks. You're arrogant, you're young, you're arrogant. You think, oh, I know how to do this. I can figure this out. No, at least not for me. Maybe there's others that,
No, I feel the same way.
but it was learning a lot of things, and it was hard. It still is hard. Like I think if you're a good father, you're trying to be a good father. You're always trying to learn. You're always going to try and make mistakes, but you're trying to be consistent and trying to be there and loving and supportive and all of those things. At 29, getting thrown in with a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I don't know. It was hard. It was hard to kind of balance that, trying to teach and discipline and be loving, and then that also plays into the fact that you're a step parent, right?
Yeah.
And that's never really been a word in our family, but that's the reality, and to some extent, I had no idea what I was doing. I did not have any idea what I was doing, and I made a lot of mistakes because of that. And also I kind of felt pressure to be more, maybe more strict or more whatever, because they didn't have that role model, So for Isaac, it was 7 years, he really didn't have a role model. Diego for 4 years. So I kind of felt like, well, they've missed out on certain things, right?
Yeah.
So I've got to make up for that. And I've got to teach them this and everything. And I went around it. I flat out went about it the wrong way, And like I said, that's been the good thing, is that I learned a lot from that experience, and I'm hoping it makes me a little bit better of a father for the younger two. But it's also one of those things, Jason, if I'm being honest, is I carry a lot of guilt for it. I think, like I said, anytime you wanted to be a good father, you want to do your best. You want to provide them and teach them and do all of these things. And there are times I feel like I failed miserably, The one thing I can kind of hold on to is that I may have failed miserably in a lot of ways, but I was there,
Yeah.
So
I think it's easy to get caught up in good father, bad father, and did I do this right? Am I doing that right? But I feel like one thing I've learned on this podcast, it comes down to like, are you trying? Yeah. Are you showing up and like putting in an effort, taking fatherhood seriously? And fatherhood, I feel like it's being attacked. It's perceived as bad to be manly and to be the father and, to have that strong father role. It's being attacked, and do we cower away, or do we stand up and really show who we are? And I think as long as we're taking fatherhood seriously and putting in a true strong effort, then we're good fathers. So that's how I feel. That's my 2 cents. Having a 3-year-old, I don't know a lot, and that's why I started this podcast, because I want to learn and I want to be better. But I can only imagine, like, I'm trying to put myself in your shoes as, from being single or, dating, going into marriage, fatherhood immediately, and then a year and a half later you have your first child. Like, that's crazy. It's a crazy timeline that I don't know a lot of people experience. What self-doubts did you fight with that maybe surprised you in those early years?
Oh man, those early years hit everything, I think, whether it was like, am I teaching them the right things? Am I providing enough? Things like that. It was really hard. Like, am I being loving enough? Am I being, so I had a great example, my dad, right? But for me, honestly, going into that situation was hard because it was like, I'm a step parent, but their dad wasn't involved, but he was there, right? So like they spoke to him, occasionally and that type of thing. So that, and the way I saw it was like, I'm not taking that away from him. Like, he might take it away from himself, right? But I'm not taking that away from you. Yeah. And so I doubted pretty much everything that I was doing because I didn't know, and again, I think that's one of those hard things because the more doubt you have, I feel like the more you screw yourself up, right? And so, I doubted my ability to teach them anything, to provide for them, and it was really hard. Again, like I said, I carry a lot of guilt on that because I always think to myself, how much better of a father could I have been? Can I be? Even now, right? You always think about that. So yeah, it was, and it was in that sense of just being thrown in, and again thinking, hey, I can do this, and then being like, I have no idea what the hell I'm doing.
Did you feel confident, like
yeah,
going in?
Oh, I totally did.
You just got smacked.
Yeah, I totally did. I was like, oh, I know how to do this. Like this, or we're going to set up these rules, and we're going to do this, and everything is just going to be by the book and everything, and they're gonna, and it wasn't like that. It wasn't like that at all. And it's interesting you talk about fatherhood being attacked, and I think you're right. I think that fatherhood is being attacked now, and for a lot of different reasons. And I think part of it for being attacked because there's not everybody's a great dad, right? And so there is that. But like to your point of, it's about you trying. It's about you being there. It's about you being consistent. Everybody's going to father differently, but it's the fact that your kids know who their father is, what their father is capable of, and that type of thing. My son asked me, because I'm not a violent person. You know what I mean? I'm not. What did he ask me a question the other day about? Hey, what if something happened like this? And I was like, yeah, I'd kill him.
Yeah. And
he's like, really? I said, yeah. That's not even a question.
Yeah.
That type of thing. And he's like, Dad, but you know what? Killing is bad. I said, yeah, I know. And he's like, well, how'd you do it? And I was like, with my hands, no problem. I said, you know what I mean? Like if this situation happened, whatever. And it was crazy because as he's asking me these things, right? He's also realizing, yeah, my dad would do that, you know? And it's not because I'm demonstrating. It's not like, you know, whatever, but it's the fact that he knows I'm going to be there.
Yeah.
You know, and my daughter, the same thing, you know? So yeah.
That's cool. So in those dark times, did you have someone you could turn to and talk to?
Yeah. I mean, yes and no. I mean, you always talk to your spouse, right? But it's also hard because, you know,
I should say outside of that.
Outside of
Spouse. Because for me, at least, it's hard to talk because you don't want to be a weight, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to hurt them, I guess, and be a weight that they have to bear.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I was curious if you had somebody else to talk to.
no. But you know what? Let's be honest. How many dads have somebody? How many men in general have somebody they can talk to?
Yeah.
You know, and that's part of the problem is that, you know, different generations are things, but it was just like, suck it up, push through, keep going. And unfortunately, that takes a toll on you.
Yeah, let it unravel 30 years later.
Exactly, you know? So, like I said, I did like the therapy thing, and that was good for certain things, but not to get off my chest, you know? I finally, you know, I finally found friends or connected with friends. It was kind of like, hey, you know what? You unload on me, I'll unload on you, and let's just talk through it type of thing, you know?
Yeah, my hope with this podcast is that I'm not an expert on anything, but if I can encourage more conversation, then I feel like it's a success. And I have my own struggles. I'm trying to be more open and be an example. It's so hard. It's so hard, but I guess if I can at least encourage these open conversations, I think it'll make a difference. So
I think it will completely, man. But that's the thing is you got to have that courage to open up, right?
Yeah.
Because again, you don't want to. You've not thought of that, and even as that image of a dad, right? Like, I don't ever remember my dad having mental health issues, right?
Yeah.
Again, it's different times now, that type of thing, but you still have that example. It's like, I got to suck it up. You know? But you're right. And then 30 years later, it all comes and.
Yeah. So I like to wrap up my podcast. I ask all my guests the same question. And that is, if there's one lesson you want to leave with your children, what is that lesson?
I want them to know that they matter, that there is something out there for them. There's a greater purpose for them. And if they can hang on to that and know that, no matter what it is that they're going through, they can get through it. You know, if they can, you know, as a religious person, as a spiritual person, if they can know that, you know what, they are the children of a heavenly Father that loves and cares for them. And so they are, you know, prince and princesses. They matter, you know. I want more than anything for them to know that, so that when I pass away, they can still continue on knowing that there is something greater out there for them.
Awesome. I love that. Well, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your knowledge, your experiences, and your thoughts. So thanks for being here.
All right, thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Cool.